Hey folks, Eshan here and Juno with another segment of All Wys Transformation, where the conversation continues because we're continuing our module of Distress Intolerance. Um, it's been really fun having Juno on. Juno, what's going on with you? What's happening? Hey.
Oh, hello. Nothing really. I've been working steadily away at the book we described last last episode. And I thought that maybe it might be fun to share a poem from it that I came up with that I would say it's 90% done, but I would love to give it to you because this is what I do with my distress intolerance. This is kind of like how I channel my frustrations, fears, and also like other things that I want, but like the things that rise for me that make me feel not great, poetry is a way that I examine them. And so I was thinking that I could share something that I examined with you guys.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay. Um, do you want me to tell you what it's about beforehand, or do you want to hear it and then give me feedback?
I no, I want you just to read it and then we'll go from there.
Okay. I was given a book and told to believe. A ceiling of stained glass was what I could achieve. I knelt in the pews, I whispered the prayers, yet none of my questions were answered in there. I questioned, but silence was all they could give. Their faith built for others, not mine to live. With questions unanswered, unburdened by shame, not seeking a path, yet the path called my name. It started in whispers, in scenes on a screen, in stories of witches, of magic unseen. A unicorn lost, a ruby red shoe, a feather light body that suddenly flew. At 7, I asked for the cards in my hand, uninitiated, a mystery, not knowing their plan. A book as a gift, a whisper, a dare. The craft lit a fire, Salem began to repair. The gods took their time, they wove through my years, each one stepping forward, making the future more clear. They lifted the veil, and the road came to light. No past left to haunt me, no wrongs left to right. I was never lost, just learning to see, unraveling truths that were waiting in me. Not taught, but reminded, not just what was told. The truth I uncovered led to reclaiming my soul. No longer mistook, no longer mistook it for some kind of sin. Loneliness faded when I turned within. Rooted in reverence, in all that I've known, not seeking approval, I stand on my own.
I love that. And
Thank you.
what is it called?
A path remembered.
Nice. Nice. It's very witchy like.
That was the plan.
It's sort of like this veil is being created and like I'm slowly peeking behind the veil of sort of what's going on in this particular event. I love it.
Yeah, it's about my experience leaving traditional religious structures and finding a path of spirituality that kind of over time revealed itself to me through relationships with different deities or different spiritual concepts or philosophies that were not what I was brought up with, but what I kind of had to find as a result of being a queer person brought up in a distinctly Roman Catholic household, and how that narrative never felt like it fit for me, and how anytime I had questions, I would ask them because I was encouraged to ask questions, and then there was never really an answer for questions like, well, if we're created in his image, then why are there men and women? Is God a boy and a girl at the same time? I remember asking that as a child and people being like, and so that poem was greatly inspired by that journey.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And it's one of those where like there's a bit of fear in taking that step into that unknown or that feeling of aloneness with it. But I think once you sort of embrace it, it sort of fulfills it. You don't feel alone. It doesn't feel scary. It's from that transition from one place to the other, right? Like it's sort of that space in between.
Absolutely. I think that I mean, let's be real, when you're wagering with a religion that says that the cost of admittance or the cost of leaving is your immortal soul, that's kind of a heavy thing to dismantle. And it took me a good like 15, 20 years to fully dismantle from that. I remember when I first talked about not believing in the God of the Bible as like the one God, the one thing. And when I said that the very first time out loud, I remember being like, whoo, like not believing in it, but still being very afraid to say that out loud. And eventually that trauma went away with time because I realized that that structure really never served me. And it was also never a way that I learned lessons. Like, I don't it- what like we can really dismantle Christianity another day. But I think that that's just how my journey with it unfolded.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. From the upcoming Make Me Gape.
You heard it here, folks. So if you're liking what you're hearing, please hit the thumbs up button, because that helps the channel a lot, and subscribe. It really, really helps. Gina, you ready for a question?
Yes, we love questions. They're so fun. These are the fun questions, right? Not the serious
Yeah,
questions.
sometimes my serious questions are fun.
Oh, they always are fun, but I just wanted to know what mindset to put myself in beforehand.
All right. If you could be any intimate object, what would you be and why?
Okay. So, when you say intimate object, how do we define that? Because my brain goes a few places like instantly.
I want your instant brain. It just says if you could be any intimate object, what would you be and why? That's all.
Okay, so two things instantly came to mind. Um, However, I'm sure that generally speaking, one of these objects gets more use than the other. At least in my life, one of these objects gets more use than the other, I'll say. Um, and those two items are a bar of soap. I would love to be a bar of soap for someone who's just like really fucking sexy. Like, let me be a bar of soap for Alexander Sarsgaard or like Jason Momoa or someone like that. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Um, that was the first thought that came to mind. And then, actually, no, that was the second thought that came to mind. The first thought that came to mind was a condom. Like, I'd love to be a condom for someone with hypospermia. Like, that sounds amazing to me. So, those are my two things that popped up. I will say that one of these items gets used more than the other. I will not say which is which, but I will say that I think that historically amongst me and my friends, one item gets used significantly more than the other.
Hyperspermia, is that when you produce lots of sperm? Is that
Yeah, like copious amounts.
okay? Okay.
What
Uh,
about you? What intimate object would you be, Eshin?
I I
I think
only
I just made you turn red, which is impressive because obviously skin tone, but
I was not expecting the condom. I was um, I think I would be a Q-tip.
interesting.
There's something about like orgasmic ear. Have you ever like done a
Yeah.
Q-tip where you're just like, like, and then you sort of hit that right spot and you're like, yes, please.
Yeah. I've fully I've fully experienced that before. Yes, it's totally great.
And I don't know what sometimes I just I don't need to use Q-tips, but I'm just using them just because that sensation is really, really nice.
Mm.
Yeah.
So future potential partners of Eshin, don't bring him flowers, bring him Q-tips.
Colored, please. Colored.
A spray of color, yeah.
So would you be like any regular bar soap, or would you be like a particular kind of a bar soap?
Oh, well, if I have that option, yeah, I would be like one of those handcrafted bars of soap that's like um organic and like all that stuff. Or like, you know what I mean? Like I would be an artisanal bar of soap. I wouldn't be like Ivory or Dove.
Fair.
I would be a bar of soap that's like you're at a farmer's market, and that farmer's market stand that has the bar of soap might also sell things like honey and other bee stuff. And then like the farmer is really cute, so you start flirting with him, and then you're like, I want to buy this soap because I want your balls on my face. So that's my vision.
I love it. I love the journey that you took me on.
Because you've been that person before. I've been that person before.
There, yes, I have been that person before.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay to be that person. We love that person.
Oh man. Okay. That was a good one. uh, let's see. Hold on. Okay. So, I'm struggling with this particular question. Okay. So, what's the most embarrassing song you secretly love to sing to alone?
Um, I don't know that I have an embarrassing song or like what's that called? Like a guilty pleasure song.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know that I have something like that. But I do have a story that, or like I do have an instance that happened once that every time a song comes on, I instantly think of it.
yeah.
Um, which is, you know the song Bulletproof?
Yes, yeah.
I think it's by LaRue or something, whatever. But it's like uh it goes da 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 bulletproof. Like it's like a very disco-y type song.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I didn't know that that was the words, and I was at a New Year's Eve one year for like for a party, and it came on, and I was like hula hoop because I didn't know what the words were, and and one of the people stops me and goes, "What did you just say?" And I said hula hoop because I wasn't sure what the words were, and he was like, "The words are bulletproof," and I was like, "Oh, that makes so much more sense actually when you think about it." And he was like, "Yeah, it's also the name of the song." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So like that's kind of I always like blush to myself when I think about that song.
Oh man, that's yeah. I see. I struggle with this one because like I immediately start thinking about like ABBA songs,
We love ABBA.
and like you said, like I'm not embarrassed because I like our ABBA songs, but I do find myself really like feeling a little mm, on the spot if I'm in straight spaces and like an ABBA song comes on.
Because you want to twirl. You want to be like, you can dance, you can jive, having the time. Yeah.
I so want to do that. I just want to start busting out and just dancing and I can't do that. Well, I restrict myself from doing that.
Yeah. Well, it could potentially be a safety thing, right? Like that's always a question that we have to ask ourselves as
Right.
queer people. Like, are we safe here?
Yeah.
Is this a safe space for me to be my authentic self in?
Yeah.
Which is a consistent question.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, that I would say ABBA songs coming on when I'm in straight spaces. I'm like, "Mm, mm."
You're like, can I be a full out faggot here? Is that okay? Are we good that? Are we good with that? I'm just curious.
I how out can I be right now?
It's true. It's something we have to think about.
Mhm. Yeah, because I feel like it's always like you're always coming out. Like whenever you go, well, for me, whenever I go to new places or meet new people, it's always like a coming out process. Even though like the moment I open my my mouth and you hear me speak, you're like, oh. But if I don't move and I don't talk, I look pretty straight.
I I'm passable. I think that for me, you kind of always know if I'm like I'm pretty feminine acting in public. And style wise, it varies. I can sometimes appear straight, like from a distance. From a distance, you look straight, not gay. Yeah, that's what the people say. I'm sorry. That just came out. But um, I think it's like as soon as you start interacting with me, you're like, oh, mama, he knows what a dick tastes like. It's not, it's a very quick transition.
Yes.
Like,
So
I think you're definitely more passable than me.
yeah, if I don't move and speak, yeah. You just have to like wheelchair me everywhere.
Or like those cardboard cutouts of people, you just like lift them straight up and place them. I can pass that way too, probably. I'm not wearing heels that day.
Oh man. All from that one question. Love it.
Like I said, we get where we're going, but we meander. We're
We
if you're showing up at this wanting a sprint through a workbook, it's just not happening. I'm sorry. That's not how Eshan and I work. It's not how we communicate. We get to the point eventually, but we meander. It's a lovely
we
walk in a park. It's not a
we
run.
we do. And I feel like it all connects, right? It's like the awkwardness of being human and finding yourself in these, fun, like rememberable situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you think about it, everything that we've talked about to this point also somehow encapsulates some form of distress intolerance.
Yeah,
The poetry we discussed was a response to my personal distress intolerance and how I deal with distress. The concept around feeling safe as a queer person in public spaces, that is a reaction to distress intolerance.
yeah,
And frequently, why so many people have built up the defense mechanism of being funny because it's charming and it disarms people. So
yeah,
many times when queer people are the funny friend, it's because it's a
right,
method of them creating safety for themselves.
yeah,
There are so many ways that even the beginning conversations we've had have set the stage for a conversation around distress intolerance.
right, right, yeah. Well, he said, well said.
Thanks. You keep me around because I'm the wild card that also has a brain.
And I've seen you look really, really sexy in dresses too. So,
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I do love a dress.
yes, yes. And the dresses I've seen you in do look really good on you. So,
Oh, thank you. And you looked lovely in the dresses I've seen you in, so.
that what one dress? One dress?
Yeah, at Easton.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
It was
Or
cute.
which I'm sure I did. I don't remember what dress it was though.
It was a very casual dress. It was during the talent show when Yolanda was there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm gonna get Yolanda on.
We love her so much.
Reverend
I
Yolanda. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
we love it. We love her.
I'm so excited. Yeah. She moved to Vermont.
I didn't know that, no.
She left New York, and she's living in Vermont now.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about Vermont. Vermont has been more and more on my radar. Because I do plan on staying in America during this administration. I think that's where I'm kind of gonna be. And so I was looking at locations and states that feel safe to live in, especially considering I want to open a communal living facility where retreats take place and things like that. I was thinking about communities that support that, that also have like ample amounts of farmland because sustainability is like really key in how I'm crafting this community. So, yeah, I think that Vermont is looking more and more enchanting.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's a whole bunch of friends that I know in the Boston area who have been gradually moving up this way. They're like in the Brattleboro area, like Newfane area. So there's a whole bunch of queer folks who are sort of moving up here because I moved here mm, 20,
More than a
27,
minute ago?
27, 28 years ago.
Oh,
And,
wow.
yeah, and I've
You don't
I've
look a day above 23.
it's all the coffee I drink. Um, I've gradually seen an uptick on more queer folks moving up here.
Well, I think it's because the leadership there really stands behind queer people, like very actively so.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that things like that are not missed on the queer community. Like we're very aware of that type
yeah,
of stuff, or at least I do my best to remain aware of where is most safe for me and where is not most safe for me. I
yeah.
mean, I've driven across this country 2 round trips. I've been to every state with the exception of uh, Hawaii and Alaska. So like both knowing what states are like, okay, I can be here safely, and also having driven through states where maybe not the safest.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
um I have that like lived experience very much so. And I think that we're really like I will say 50 countries united under a flag, but I've only been to 48 of the countries that are united by this flag. Um yeah, it's such a weird thing
yeah,
to live here.
yeah,
And so it's very weird to me.
yeah. Like, don't get it wrong. Like, Vermont is pretty conservative, even though I think they always traditionally vote blue. But for the most part, there are pockets of purple in the state of Vermont.
Yeah.
I think it was more apparent to me when civil union was sort of coming up. What was that like 2005, 2004 or something, somewhere around
Yeah,
there.
right around there.
Um, I were seeing on people's lawns like take back Vermont signs. I was like, where did you people come from? And so Vermont is conservative. Um, with I think a lot of the um, uh, transplants like Brattleboro, Burlington, those are a lot of transplant folks who tend to vote Democratic.
Mm. I mean, I would, based on what I want to create, which you're aware of, like the thing I'm working on, um, I would be looking for like multiple acres of land. So I probably wouldn't be immediately next to anyone, quite honestly.
Mhm.
But I just like knowing that the people that get voted in Vermont
Yeah, yeah,
have the best intention for
yeah,
like queer people.
yeah,
And I think that that's the thing, right? It's I don't necessarily need you to like me. I don't need you to agree with me. I just want both of us to be able to interact with each other respectfully.
right,
And um I want to be able to agree to disagree. I want to be able to say like as a human having another human experience, I am capable of hearing you out and I am capable of disagreeing with you and we are still both capable of being civil.
yeah,
I think that isn't that called like civil discord? I think that that
mhm, yeah,
is an art form that's like a little bit lost right now. Like the ability to be civil and have disagreements, which is like sad because
yeah.
it's such a beautiful world that we get to experience. Why not be able to look at it from different angles if you're not wanting to experience it from different angles?
Right, right. But again, I don't want to portray Vermont as like super conservative. Like there are really good people in Vermont, like hardworking, people who like most places are working like, two jobs, if not three. Um, Definitely soul of the earth kind of people, and they will take the shirt off their back to help you and support you. Um, but there are these aspects of folks who really struggle to feel like like social services or mental health supports, like those are all crutches, and they're sort of um, decoupling the fabric of society because we're giving handouts, and so there does seem to be this like struggle of like you need to sort of do this on your own, pull yourself by your bootstraps, but in community, like it's awesome living in Vermont because they have those folks who are there to support you and back you up, family, right? Like your neighbor, if your neighbor feels like you need some support, they'll come over and like help you. But very, very like independent people.
I think that what you're describing, and this is not me attempting to make an excuse for anybody, but I think what you're potentially describing is not so much the belief structure of a person, but more the tangential effects of late stage capitalism.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think we're watching the dismantling of a system right now,
Mhm.
and I think that um, that mentality of like pick yourself up by your bootstraps, blah, 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 like that whole like stay in a job for 60 years and die after getting a pen for your service, like that whole mentality. Um, sorry, not sorry, boomers. Like that is that mentality is dying because that world is dying.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that as we move towards like smaller community developments and different ways to participate with the world around us, you're asking people a way to step away from a failing model,
yeah.
an unsustainable model. And I think that that's where you see that type of like, I think that's the birth of a lot of hate, honestly.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. One more thing, and then we're gonna get into it. There is the fairy community that lives in Chester, Vermont. Radical fairies that do have a plot of land, and I've been there. It's beautiful, and they're creating community. And this summer, I would invite you to sort of come up and check out. Um,
I will be there.
yeah, yeah.
We
You and
love
I
it.
have
It's fun.
you and I have lots of swing plans this summer. I'm sort of excited.
Yes, absolutely. And we can even do a recording maybe live at one of these events. Very
Ooh.
like Juno and Eshan bopping around, like that type of thing.
And I would probably have a wig on.
We love it.
Hey, folks.
She's Foxy Cleopatra and she's a whole lot of woman. That's
I, I love you.
I love you.
I so love you. Hey, folks. I truly did have Juno on here to talk about distress intolerant. So we're gonna finish module one, where Juno, if you're with me on page 9 on the last part of module one. So, talking about triggers, identifying big, small, internal, external triggers, and then navigating through those feelings of either sadness, anger, or fear, and then identifying or taking note of what is my belief that I have about this particular situation. Can I not bear my feelings? Is this sort of am I feeling really bad, or am I fearful like this emotion will never end, which sort of like gets you more into sort of like this negative emotional loop of distress. um and then they talk about escape methods, right, in the sense of, well, if these emotions are so intense that I can't deal with them, I'm either going to cut myself, I'm going to use substances to numb out, I'm going to engage in probably unhealthy behaviors.
Hmm.
Anything that you wanted to point out on that particular format that they have about identifying the distress piece?
So you're talking about the like little flow chart thing that triggers negative emotions type
Yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Yeah, I think that, you know, negative emotions, they all have a purpose, right? Like the reason why they come up. And I think that we talked about this a little bit off camera that kind of the when you experience a negative emotion, it's optimal or preferred to do something like step into the role of the observer when you're experiencing them.
yeah,
Um, because and also like just referring to feelings of fear, we discussed them a little bit earlier, like jokingly about ABBA and stuff like that. But like I guess you have to ask with negative emotions, but I'm gonna zone in specifically on fear and say like when you're dealing with an emotion like fear, um, is it because you feel safe to experience the fear, where because your external environment is holding such a container for you that you're feeling so safe that it's okay for fearful things to come up for you to experience them? Or is it that the external environment that you're experiencing is causing you to experience fear? And how sometimes certain stressors or um, certain stressors can trigger events that are telling us something internal is at work or something external is at work, and like how we participate with the negative emotion fear response, such and such.
Right. Yeah, I think there's value in fear, right? There's value in anger, and even sadness. That sometimes anger can be a motivator, right? Specifically, if there's an injustice that has happened, getting motivated to do something or to work on a project to prevent that from happening again. And so, I think the emotional piece is how do you sort of lean into the negative or perception or myth that emotions are either good or bad when they're sort of just emotions themselves, and leaning into it requires a perspective, sort of taking a different view on the emotion, a different way of looking at it.
I think also um, becoming the observer, it involves removing judgment from the emotion. So not saying this is good or bad, but saying like this is this. What does this mean to me?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah,
That's my thought around the observer. And because like when you are the observer, right, when you're the thing experiencing itself, like judgment no longer kind of exists there.
yeah.
It's kind of more like, well, what is happening and why?
Do
Because
do you sometimes feel like the observer is selfish? Do you feel like the observer is self-absorbed? Well, and maybe I'm using it in the context
I
of,
think that those are both words that involve judgment, and you cannot be the observer and be judgmental.
but I guess, don't you feel like, well, I'm just want to have a conversation about this concept of that when you are in a distress place and you're viewing it or you're choosing to view it in a negative aspect, doesn't that make you self-absorbed? Doesn't that make
That's like
you,
saying that choosing to analyze your human experience makes you self-absorbed.
I feel like within the perspective of like, you're not necessarily powerless. You are not the victim. Yes, what you're going through feels hard. Yes, what's happening to you is tragic, and you will make it to the other end. But for right now, how do you accept that you are going through something difficult? It's sort of like that radical acceptance, right? Like the ability to not judge the feeling in a way that perpetuates that you have no agency to be able to move or change. I don't know. I sort of feel like that's really self-absorbed, don't you think? It because it feels like an unhealthy coping mechanism because, oh, I've been abandoned. And again, maybe I'm taking a harsh stance, and maybe it's like a very sort of
Well, I
unkind.
think like I can liken the observer to a more clinical technique, which is like empty chair technique, where you basically like you sit in a chair and you say like these are the things I'm feeling, these are the problems I'm experiencing, whatever. And then you stand up and you look at the empty chair and you give it the advice that you would give someone else.
Mhm.
And like that, I think that very much that exercise is very similar to being in the present moment and experiencing the aspect of being the observer,
Yeah.
because the observer is just the witness to the events of the soul, in my opinion, in my belief system, in my personal BS, my personal belief system. um I think that um being the observer is almost a hyper presence in the moment, whereas like experiencing fear, which um to me can sometimes stand for like false evidence appearing real. Like experiencing fear is a state of not being in the present moment, because when you're thinking fearfully, you're thinking of how it's going to affect outside of you, whether that be how is this thing going to affect me in the future, or how is this thing going to affect people's perception of me from the past. It Fear is a non-local emotion. It is emotion that takes you somewhere else. So I think that it really depends on your ability to be present with what you're feeling and how you decipher the thing that you're feeling in the
Yeah.
present moment.
Yeah. I, I, I completely agree with you. I feel like the technique of the observer is an important tool to use. I guess I'm sort of struggling or sitting with this concept of like when you are in the depths of your pain, when you are in the grips of your fear, that to some degree it feels selfish because you have now become identified with the feeling. Not saying that your feelings aren't valid, but it's before you use the tool to the observer, right? It's before you use the tool of being kind and compassionate with yourself. It's there is this for me, observing somebody in their pain to a certain degree feels self-absorbed. I don't,
Well, for me, when I talk about being the observer, I don't talk about being the observer of someone else. It's more for me like being the observer of myself. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
how, and also I think that we're kind of talking about emotions like as if they're not meant to process through us.
yeah,
Like we can just step like as if we can just step back and watch the train pass.
yeah,
And like we don't necessarily get that option. Like
yeah,
when we are experiencing emotions, they are very, very similar to like waves, or like have you ever like when you're in the ocean and a wave comes and you jump and you feel that kind of like crest and the movement up and then the descent down. You feel that kind of like whole journey of the emotion. So like I think that emotions are all also journeys. It
mhm,
and it's about kind of moving through the emotion and not getting stuck and letting it settle in the body somewhere.
yeah,
And I think that, like, when you talk about energy centers and chakras and auras and stuff like that's all just a different way of understanding where an emotion or a trauma or a fear, where that stuff sits in your physical body, where is it stored most of the times. And then you do things with talk therapy, like CBT, or with workbooks like this that bring the emotion to the surface. And then you can do something with a more somatic healing technique like sound therapy, like breath work, like yoga, like any type of uh, kind of therapeutic technique that involves moving things, moving your physical body, ecstatic dance, something like that, that will then move the energy fully out of the body, out of the person, so that like you're not just continuing to re-traumatize yourself talking about the memory to try to like make sense of it, when there are some things that also just your mind isn't going to make sense out of. You might be able to make the connection like I experienced this because of this, but if you don't let go of the thing that you've made that connection over now, you're just going to re-experience that connection over and over again when you revisit it in your head.
right. And I feel for me that is what is can be a choice in continuing that cycle that's not serving you anymore, but the belief that if I continue going there, it's serving me or I'm solving something. Like again, it
To me,
everything.
that's the area of it. like when you continue to revisit it without doing the work to move through it, that's just self-indulgent, and that's the part that's like selfish.
Yes.
Whereas I think that choosing to step into the role of an observer or choosing to do a somatic technique that moves it through you, that's choosing to do like the work that we
Yeah.
talk about in this workbook, like
Yeah.
the work that requires us to develop as people versus doing something like just choosing to talk about this thing that is re-traumatizing you and talking about bringing it up again, because then you're really integrating the trauma into who you are as part of your personal narrative,
Yeah.
and then you're starting to define yourself by your traumas instead of moving through your traumas.
Right. 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 And also attracting other people, right? Because there's also that trauma bonding where, like, if you're radiating or if you're sort of leaking or oozing somewhere, right? Like that's going to attract people to you, and that's going to keep you in that sort of cycle.
Well, if you also reference the Hermetic principles, which we've talked about as a theme throughout all of these, there's there one of the principles is like polarity and magnetism and stuff like that, and kind of the idea that you draw things to you based on where your resonant frequency is. And so, um, if you are needing to, like, have you ever dated somebody and noticed that you've had the same issue come up with them time and time again? Like, oh, I date the same type of person, or I find myself that when I'm with this person, I, even though like they're different people, these two exes, we still broke up for the same reason or something like that. The reason for a pattern like that is because there's something in you that you're not addressing that you are attempting to work out through this person as your reflection, as
Mhm.
your divine reflection. So you are calling in a partner to say, I want to do work that that I can't see on my own, so I'm asking them to reflect it back to me. So then you call out to the universe for a partner, the universe delivers you a partner, and then if you haven't dealt with the issue, then they're going to show you the issue. And if you're noticing the same patterns, like around the concept of like, oh wow, I always date guys that are super narcissistic, or like, oh wow, I always date guys that are X, Y, or Z, like that's something that internally you're needing to deal with before you enter this environment again, because otherwise you're just going to repeat the pattern.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting that you say that because it reminds me of Eckhart Tolle in his book The Power of Now, and he talks similarly to what you just mentioned in the sense of I think he calls it the pain body, where we're holding these either traumas or we're holding these emotional impacts that we don't necessarily have worked through, and we keep attracting and we keep sort of luring in, or we keep accepting these aspects that are no longer healthy or no longer serving us, but because we're so fearful of the other or living in another way, that it's just easier to accept the pain body. It's easier to accept living in what feels comfortable even though it's dysfunctional.
Yeah. And I think that, and let me just say, like, what I'm suggesting that people do is hard work. Like, being that level of honestness with yourself and being that level of like, um, yeah, because like that level of honesty with the self does not always start in kindness. It sometimes starts in fear and frustration and anger and all these like things that you need to work through. But like, as much as I think everyone should walk that path, I know that that is not a path for everyone.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, I
And
completely
it's
agree.
valid to not participate in the human experience in that way. I just want to say that.
Yeah,
But when I say these things, this is how I've figured out that I have to work in the world, because
right.
otherwise all this is ribbons and falls apart. If I don't participate in the world this way, I fall apart.
Yeah, yeah. I do recognize that I am working on how I really attract emotionally unavailable men. And if there is an interest, I happen to be emotionally unavailable. So there is something to the level of intimacy, the level of vulnerability, the level of being seen that makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, to your comfort, may I make an observation and you can either choose to keep it in or not?
Yeah, yeah.
I would maybe choose to look at how you feel worthy because that would that was the first word that jumped out to me around the subject when you started to explain to me.
Hmm.
And
And
like
and
if
maybe there is a level where I don't feel worthy. Yeah, I think it obviously it's some heavy lifting to be in partnership and to not bleed on to the other person. And so sometimes I don't know if I've recognizing the nuance of what does it mean to share and what does it mean to overshare that my partner is not my therapist, right? Like there is a sort of like fine boundary, and I think sometimes I struggle in that particular dance.
I
Um,
think that for me at least, because somebody also brought this up yesterday about like not wanting to overshare with me. And I was like, if I'm ever uncomfortable with something you've said to me, or if I ever feel like you're sharing more than I'm capable of receiving, I am happy to tell you. I am happy to be like, that's actually a personal boundary that you just crossed, or like, I'll just tell you. But I think that generally speaking, especially if I'm in relations with someone where like they are my current divine reflection, I want to fully understand them because I look at the person that I'm dating as my highest divine self holding up a mirror to me going, "Do you like how this looks? Because this is what you look like right now." And so I think that I I stay single mostly because I kind of get off on doing the work. I kind of like it's very mentally stimulating for me how I process like my own emotions and stuff like that. So like there are times where I'm feeling really low and then I need to emotionally process with other people to avoid self-harming or stuff like that or using unhealthy coping techniques. Um, but I definitely enjoy the process of experiencing the emotions, of learning the emotions, of kind of moving through the emotions.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think that's why I haven't had like a partner in a long while because I became kind of fascinated with the process.
But do you feel, and maybe I'm projecting, I feel like to a certain degree, well, let me ask you the question. Do you feel like the partner may not be able to manage what you're presenting or
I think
fully
that if a
accept?
this is where I'm like I have and this maybe gets me into a little bit of trouble. Like my level of expectations for people because if I bring a lot to the table in terms of emotional stability, in terms of creativity, in terms of ambition, I bring a lot of things to a relationship. And it is my expectation that if I'm involving myself with you and calling you my divine reflection, and I'm choosing to take into account how I shape my life because of my relationship to you, you need to be as exceptional as me. And
Mhm.
so I don't really find myself in relation with people that don't get me. It's a matter of the question of do you get me in a way that is going to escalate to a place of like romance and physical exchanges, or is it that like you get me in a way where we're kind of planning something other than that through a lens of like friendship or sisterhood or some form of community. But I think a large portion of why people experience distress in the way that they do today is because we don't access community the same way that we used to. And
Mhm.
for so long, we existed in community where we didn't need one person to be our everything. I
Mhm.
think that the narrative around having like one true love or like one absolute everything that you cast your whole life onto this other person, it's such an unreasonable request to ask for another individual to be your everything. I
Mm.
think it's just, it's unhealthy. It leads to behaviors like codependency. I think that if you can say, like, hey, these are the people in my life that I get this type of emotion from, and these are the people in my life that I share these types of things with, and these are the people in my life that I like to have these types of experiences with. It gives you a much more rich life experience. And then when you're looking to someone to be a romantic partner, it doesn't have to be that that person fills all of these things and then is this thing. It's like this person can be a lovely complement, or people, because like multiple partner relationships are totally valid and totally a thing. But like this person or group of people should be a complement to you. And they should also be complete individuals. They shouldn't be people looking for you to complete them. Like I'm looking for another complete person who is a lovely complement to me. Like I like to say, I don't mind baggage. I just want a matching set of luggage. Like I want something where it all makes sense.
I I agree. I feel like there is this thing where the expectation, the assumption, or sometimes meeting somebody, and I've done this, probably more so in my last relationship, where there was the image that I had about the person or the assumption I had about the person. And I think this is the important work about distress intolerance is not only identifying emotions that you can't sit with, but it's identifying emotions that are your blind spots, right? And I think sometimes the blind spots are the narrative or the story we tell ourselves of how you should be in a relationship or what your partner should look like, and obviously having standards, but there is this level of I am creating a version of the person I'm interested in, and yet the reality of who they are, I'm struggling to accept for whatever reason, because it doesn't match that narrative. And so I think when discourse happens, or when an argument happens, or when a blow up happens, just whatever that friction is, it sometimes is the person shaking that perception of what you thought they were, and letting that go, and just seeing the person for who they are, matching luggage and all. And
I think that also it's like it also ties into communication, right?
yeah,
Because like
yeah,
if you don't tell people like this is what I want and this is what I need to feel fulfilled, you're not gonna get it.
right.
Like, I was talking to somebody recently and they had made a comment and I was like, oh yeah, well, if we ever hook up or whatever, this is what I'd want you to do beforehand. And they were like, that's just because you're greedy or whatever. And I was like, no, no, it's actually because I'm comfortable asking for what I want now and not just accepting what you give me. And so
Mm.
after I said that, he was like, well, okay. Well, like, kind of like, well, when you put it like that, I was like, yeah, because I'm, I mean, as a person who grew up going to New York City, like in the 90s, early 2000s, like really experienced New York City club culture and New York City socialite culture and fashion. And like, I really experienced the artful side of New York City. I was super lucky to have lived that in like what I perceived the height of like a really cool era in New York City to be. Um, I just think it's like I completely lost my thought as I was saying that.
Yeah.
Regardless, I think that communication is key, and you have to be willing to ask for what you want if you in fact want it, because that's the only way you're gonna get it.
And I think you were sort of saying about community too, like the importance of one person not meeting
You're
not
everything.
yeah. And like I have a majority.
Oh,
Oh,
I remember what I was gonna say.
yeah, go ahead, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So like also talking about that and experiencing community and a very colorful life, like things like the heteronormative narrative are extremely destructive for people that don't live within that system. And people don't understand that. They talk about how seeing like queer people kiss in a kid's book is like indoctrination, when really they don't take into account the fact that they per they display the heteronormative narrative as the default setting of how you are to participate with this existence is extremely damaging to people that don't get to participate in this world in that way.
Right.
And it's just ridiculous.
And to go along with that, right, I feel like that narrative for most cis identifying males, they struggle with the concept of femaleness, right? Like they identify as straight, but there's something that they're only there for their bodies, right? They're only there for the possession, and either are fearful or intimidated by a woman's divinity, by a woman's natural flow. And I also think vice versa, there are women who believe that a male chauvinist, unattached, brutal man is what it means to be in a relationship with the man, right? So I'm worth something because of my body, and are not identifying their the divine feminine in them. And so that destructive narrative, heteronormative narrative, also only looks at the physical of what does it mean to be male and what does it mean to be female. And I feel that's damaging. I've had conversations with my sort of heterosexual cis-identifying female friends where they can't see themselves in an open relationship, but yet their partner is like fucking around, right?
And you're like, surprise, you're in one. Surprise, bitch.
and so I'm, to each their own. And I'm not saying, polygamy works for everybody, right? To teach her, but there is something to be said that if you are not being recognized within the divinity of your ness, of whatever your ness is, because I think we both hold male and female energies. And so if you're not able to sort of sit in that, don't expect anybody else to value you because you don't value yourself.
Yeah. Actually, in 2026, um, I believe it's going to be February. I'm hosting a retreat called the Reclamation of Self. It Tickets aren't available yet, but if you're interested, you can book a one-on-one with me on my website. But it is about exiting the gender binary within the confines of spiritual existence and embracing the concept of the divine androgyne, which is the unification of both those spiritual aspects in one divine being. And that it doesn't matter what your outside looks like at all. It doesn't matter how you identify with like gender in relation to the world around you, but it is all about seeking like divine balance within ourself and like balancing the active and passive natures of existence, balancing the polarities of our inner world.
Mhm, mhm. And I think those um, can be uncomfortable to, because I know accepting what it mean for me to be queer was a struggle, because coming from a sort of like a heteronormative Catholic male run, culture, it was like, oh, you want to talk about feelings? Oh, you like, "Ooh, let's talk about cars and politics."
You're like, what do you mean you feel sad? I'm confused by this.
And so going into accepting your emotions, your feelings, a willingness to accept the distress, and being mindful and curious about the distress feeling. And so some of the steps that the workbook talks about is when you are going through distress feelings is being the observer, and I think Juno mentioned that, sort of like observing the feeling. And then and then the other part they talk about is labeling and describing the emotion, right? So it's like, oh, I'm feeling fear right now, and it's sort of sitting in my chest, or I'm feeling sad right now. It's sort of it's sort of in, like the discomfort is in my head or on my shoulders. And so labeling and identifying the emotions and the non-judgmental piece, right? I think for me that's sort of the work is not putting a judgment or a label on the feeling, but just being curious about the feeling. Oh, I'm projecting my insecurity, or yeah, I identify that I keep attracting unavailable men, but the sex is really good, and 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 so I think being curious about why am I attracted to emotionally unavailable men, but the sex is really good. Like is that my way of connecting or sort of that.
Maybe you're saying, listen, all the other aspects of my life are fine right now. All I need is my back blown out every now and again. And all I need is to shatter a pelvis every now and again. So, like, that's that. Maybe you're just that's your way of meeting your own needs in a way that you find fulfilling. Or maybe you could examine a deeper version of what that might look like. It depends on what you
And,
want.
right, and it's a choice, right? And so I have to make that choice to do the work, and I'm actively working on it. There are moments that are more tempting than others to not work on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if that's the outcome. Like, it's a honey trap. You know what I mean? You're like, do I put in the work to be with somebody or do I just enjoy the sex that's I'm getting enough of? Valid ways to participate in the world. It's just what do you want from the experience?
It's so true. And then the last tool they talk about is imagery, and I think Juno talked about the ocean wave. There's the train aspect where it's sort of seeing all your intense emotions or unbearable emotions on a train. You're sort of visualizing this at a train station, and your trains are the train is sort of flying by or is sort of whizzing by, and your emotions are sort of just going right, and doing that as many times as need be, or the imagery of a cloud, and the emotions are on the cloud and they're sort of floating by and just floating away, or the imagery of an empty room where you're in a room and one end there's a door and the other end there's another door or a window, and your emotions are sort of coming in like guests and then they're leaving through the other door. And then the last imagery is the naughty child or the child that's throwing the tantrum, right? And so your emotions are just a 5-year-old child that just is not happy or not satisfied with what's sort of going on, or yeah, just throwing a tantrum. And so it's observing that, or that's one of the tools to use the imagery of observing your emotions.
And I love kind of all of those approaches for different things. Because,
Yeah,
like, I know that if I'm working a full situation out, like a whole thing from, like, say I felt I didn't represent myself appropriately in a scenario that involved many people. I do this meditation that's called the Mind Palace, where, like, I can go into the Mind Palace and create a room, and then in that room, anything can happen. So it's kind of like the door and the window you were talking about, or the two doors where you're in a room, but except like I can do anything in this room. So
yeah,
like I can create things, I can destroy things, I can re-experience things, I can rewrite things. So like um I find like the Mind Palace to be a super helpful activity that I
yeah,
do in workshops too sometimes.
yeah,
So like if you ever are in one of my workshops, that might be a thing you see me do.
yeah. I happen to like the wave because sometimes it feels like I could do some breathing with it. So like sort of taking an exhale in, the waves are coming in, taking an exhale out, the waves are sort of going out. And so sometimes I use breathing techniques, um, specifically using that imagery.
We
When
know
I
I'm a big fan of breathing techniques. I do the breath work every 2 weeks. Which one is
what
coming up
yeah,
next
which one's coming
week?
up? The
It's
which
coming
one?
up a week from yesterday is the full moon.
Full moon,
I
yeah.
think.
Because
Yeah.
we just got done with the dark
The
moon,
new
right?
moon. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
And
then
this one is going to be a lunar eclipse, I believe. There's going to be a lunar eclipse coming up. So
ooh,
eclipses astrologically are great for removing things from your life. So if you're dealing with a pattern that you want to like eclipse out of your life, um, you can work on releasing that on an eclipse. Or sometimes around eclipses, old relationships will show up and kind of say like, "Hey, remember this pattern? Did you want to bring this back, or do you want to let it go? Is this worth trading in? Is this worth trading up?" Like that type of thing. So eclipses are wonderfully um, reflective moments that allow us to kind of see on a larger scale the things that serve and don't serve us and give us a way of releasing on a bigger scale than, say, with a full moon.
and when's this happening?
Hold on, let me look at the date before I lie.
Uh, don't
The
lie.
14th. So it's literally a week from yesterday.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that can
Uh,
be, you can register for that on my website or in the show notes below.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I was thinking when this was going to air, that's what I was thinking about.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
because I wanted to sort of coincide with with folks to have enough time to sign up. Because last time I only had the calendar, and I was like, why can't I not sign up on this thing?
Well, I changed the settings actually. So now people can sign up to a half hour before the event. So it
Okay,
shouldn't be an issue. Um, but yeah, you can actually register for any of them up to the next 4 months out. So you could even pre-register for future ones.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
And the last portion of this particular segment of module two that we've been sort of powering through here, uh, module two, accepting distress. And so the last part that talk about is comeback, right? Like the distress feeling is going to come back. You know, you're the sadness, the anger, the loneliness, it's going to come back. And so not feeling like you failed, even though you've gone through these various techniques and these various coping mechanisms that you've used and it doesn't seem to be working and the emotions come back, it's okay. It's fine. It goes back to just repracticing the non-judgmental aspect and the imagery and the breathing. But they will come back.
And also I think like this is gonna sound maybe weird to people. Um, but I think the more we work towards enlightenment, if you want to call it that, or the more we work towards mastering our relationship with our bodies or our emotions, or however you want to relate to that, I think that you begin almost to look forward to the struggles because with each struggle comes an ability to learn something new about yourself and about how you interact with the world around you. And I think when you start to reframe these negative emotions as lessons for how to know yourself and like lessons for your self-worth or how you show up in the world around you or lessons for how you want to be treated or what you find acceptable and not acceptable. I think it changes the whole way that emotions even show up for us. And I think that choosing to participate with emotions in that way all of a sudden, I don't want to say it like disempowers them, but it makes the scary ones less scary.
Right, right. Well, yeah, because I think your emotions have value. You know, it the way that you feel is valid, but not identifying with the feeling, not letting the feeling overtake you or just yeah, just identifying with the feeling. For me, that's sort of the work of awareness. It's like, yeah, I'm sad, but I'm not in the sadness, and I'm not the sadness. I'm observing the sadness, right?
Yeah.
You are not your feelings, even though it does feel very real.
Yeah. You are not your feelings, but your feelings are extremely valid. And it is imperative that you ask what they are trying to show you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's it for this section, Juno. We've covered
Yay!
part of module two, where we talked about seeing the differences in our emotions, and we talked about the perception of how we see fear, anger, sadness. We talked about the acceptance of the emotions and sort of like the willingness to accept the emotions for what it is, and the tools or the skills that we use to work through those emotions. And sort of it's the observer, the not labeling, describing, being curious, non-judgmental, and the imagery tools. And then it's going to come back. You're
Yay!
It's going to come back.
It's
Uh,
coming back for the sequel. Mad Depression Part 2.
Anything else you want to add before we head on out?
No, I want to thank you for having me once again. So much fun as always, and I look forward to exploring more modules.
Yay! Hey, folks, we will be back for module two, part two of module, because we ended module one of part three.
Yeah, time's an illusion, so are numbers. It's just a structure so that we can pretend that we understand what's happening.
And on that note, we'll see you next time, folks.